Welcome back. One of the great American diplomats joins us today, Ambassador Chas Freeman, who was the former US Ambassador to Saudi Arabia, but also served as the Assistant Secretary of Defense. So thank you for coming back on the program.
I'm glad to be with you, Glenn. Nice to see you again.
Likewise. We're living through turbulent times, obviously. At least we're seeing the symptoms. That is, after World War II, we set up our own international institutions, new international law, uh, political alliances, military alliances, a very unique economic architecture. But all of this, of course, rested on a very specific distribution of power. And this was obviously modified after the Cold War to essentially expand the Western model to try to make it global. But now that this era of hegemony is over, you would assume that everything from international institutions to alliances would have to shift, change to adjust to the new distribution of power. Most important, I would say, is all countries around the world now, including the US, are recognizing that there is limits on US power, what it can do, and countries will have to adjust accordingly. So I was wondering, again, as a former ambassador to Saudi Arabia, what do you see happening now in that part of the world? Because, there's a lot of things happening, but the most uh, recent or interesting has been this new defense pact between Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan. I can't really get a firm grasp on it. That is it anti-Iranian? Is it intended to accommodate Iran in the long term? Is it meant to mainly do some superficial cooperation? Is it possibly used to replace a declining US, possibly defend against Israel? It's unclear. Maybe they haven't charted a clear path forward yet. But how are you reading this situation?
Well, I think the tripartite alliance, if you can call it that, perhaps entente is the better word, limited partnership for limited purposes, is yet to be reveal its full purposes. So you're not alone in being somewhat both intrigued and somewhat confused about what it's about. But let me attempt to provide some answers. I think you opened with a statement which I completely agree with, and that is that other countries have concluded they cannot any longer rely on the United States for their security, and that therefore they have to develop self-reliance and new partnerships to protect themselves. This is an instance of that. Basically, it is a declaration by the Saudis with the Pakistanis and the Turks that American leadership in the region is no longer viable, and that they have to chart their own future, their own destiny, not without reference to the United States. They don't want to divorce the United States. It provides benefits to them that others may not be able to match, but they do want to distance themselves and establish their own agency, if you will. And within that context, what we have is an agreement to coordinate policy, to exchange intelligence, to build a common military-industrial base, and to come to each other's aid if attacked. There is language very similar to that of Article 5 in NATO, but like Article 5 in NATO, the response to an attack on a member is left to the constitutional processes and political decisions of each member. There is no automaticity, even though many people imagine that was the case with the North Atlantic Treaty. Of course, it is not. The United States insisted that it would act within its constitutional processes, meaning by reference to the authority of the Congress under the Constitution to make war. Of course, the Constitution has been basically disregarded now by the executive branch, so I'm not quite sure what that means. I guess it means if Donald Trump is feeling okay and someone gets attacked, maybe he'll come to their aid, maybe not. Or maybe he'll come to their aid for half a day and then decide he's had enough. We don't know. Anyway, I think their same ambiguities affect this Pakistani, Saudi, Turkish pact. I would note a number of things. First of all, I think it is mainly intended to counter Israel and the Israeli regional Greater Israel Project and Israel's nuclear arsenal. Pakistan, by implication, has extended nuclear extended deterrence to Saudi Arabia and to Turkey. That is good from the Iranian point of view because it reduces the likelihood that any of those other two countries, Saudi Arabia and Turkey, will go nuclear. Pakistan is, of course, a nuclear power, the only such power in the Muslim world. The question of what the relationship to Iran may turn out to be, I think, is open. This is also intended to provide assurances against Iranian hegemony, to be sure. But we don't know what the future Persian Gulf security architecture will be, and therefore it's very hard to understand how this might relate to that overall architecture. I would say that one very important point that the Turks have emphasized is that this pact is open to additional membership. And we've already seen movements by Kuwait, which has a defense agreement much less complete, a more ambiguous defense relationship with Pakistan, and therefore is a logical member of this. Qatar also has expressed considerable interest in this pact. And that, of course, does immediately raise the question of Iranian views. As far as I know, the Iranians have not said much about this, if anything, which I think is wise on their part. It is very possible that the future security architecture in the Persian Gulf will, as Iran demands, involve the absence of any American military presence. And in fact, it looks to me, as I believe I've said before to you, that looks to me as though Iran is deliberately trying to herd U.S. forces into a concentration in Israel, which everyone in the region would regard as an entirely legitimate target, whether it did anything or not, given its behavior in Lebanon, in Syria, and Gaza, and its attacks on Yemen and Iran, its interference in Iraqi Kurdistan and other issues. So we have a big question, which is what happens after the war. Well, the war itself is not in any danger of ending soon. There is no prospect of a negotiated solution. Donald Trump is practicing his usual denial and fabrication of narrative approach to an unpleasant reality. He insists the United States Navy controls the Strait of Hormuz, which is nonsense. But it is, in a sense, an admission to the world that the energy shortages we are now experiencing, and which are going to get much worse, are not the product of Iran, but of the aggressors against Iran, who created this situation and now actually enforcing a blockade in the Strait of Hormuz ourselves. So that was a very foolish admission. He also said that many tankers are passing through the strait. That is not true. 5 to 10 a day are passing somehow at best. In order to remedy the oil shortages and bring prices back under control, somewhere between 80 and 100 ships a day would have to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. There's no prospect that's going to happen anytime soon. And I'll just say a final thing here. And of course, I should admit that and note that the existence of this tripartite entente between Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, Turkiye, as they now say, does not include existing wars. So, in other words, those are just not included. We're talking about a future attack on one of these signatories. So the war in Yemen, the war between Yemen and Saudi Arabia, which has been on again and off again for quite a while, is not included in this, and there should be no expectation that the Turks or the Pakistanis would intervene in Yemen on behalf of the Saudis. Nor is the war in Lebanon included. So that is, of course, a war on one of the resistance forces that remains formidable, the Hezbollah. But let me finish up by saying that I think Donald Trump's reaction to all this is, as he says, to low-key it. Low-key has become a verb, I guess. And low-keying it means keep the headlines few and far between, so people can exercise their skills at amnesia, which Americans are very good at. And we can hide our own Easter eggs, which is a talent that few have. So anyway, the idea is to keep the headlines down. Well, because this is an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment, despite his claims of everything being wonderful and under control. This is the classic bureaucratic response to an unseemly event. Nothing to see here. Nothing to go away. Nothing to see here. Well, there is something to see there. And unfortunately, trying to, quote, low-key it, unquote, gives Iran a great incentive to create headlines. And it reserves the right to strike at American bases or American facilities or allies of the United States or partners of the United States who are complicit in American aggression or Israeli aggression against Iran at will. And we've seen this with an attack on Kuwait, facilities in Kuwait, that was not preceded by any provocation from Kuwait. So I think we're going to see a return to what many might consider the normal situation. That is, everything since the end of the Ottoman Empire has been turbulent in the region, and it's not going to stop being turbulent. And that isn't going to change, even if, as this must eventually happen, the U.S. Navy sails away from the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. Why must the Navy sail away? Because equipment on board those ships is wearing out and breaking. The sailors have been at sea for far too long. The food is inadequate, has to come from far away. We're hearing from families that the food is unacceptably limited. And we also know that the ship's stores where sailors buy necessities like razor blades and that kind of toothbrushes and that kind of thing, these stores are empty now. So you have wear and tear on families, wear and tear on the sailors, wear and tear on the ships, and it's ultimately not sustainable. And that brings me to my final comment, which is that what has happened is an ironic situation in which both Iran and the United States have exactly the same strategy, which is to inflict economic pain in the hope that eventually it will induce one side or the other to capitulate. And in that context, Iran has all the advantages. It is much better prepared to absorb suffering than the United States. It is there. It does not have to sustain ships, 9,000 miles away from its homeland. It may have been beaten militarily in the sense that the United States outmatched it, but it has the balance of fervor on its side, and it will persist. And the war in Iran is one about protecting Iranian national identity and autonomy. The war, from the American perspective, is extremely unpopular and will have a deleterious effect on Donald Trump and the Republican Party in the midterms to come, even if the anticipated skyrocketing in energy prices and shortages of diesel fuel and jet fuel do not eventuate. So in this context, The tripartite entente, which you asked about, is a declaration of autonomy strategically, not declaring fealty to any external patron, not relying on any external patron exclusively, diversifying relationships, something that's been underway for 20 years, and basically making common cause with others in the region to stimulate self-reliance for the long term. So I think, maybe there's a lot of evolution in this tripartite arrangement to develop, but I think its immediate purpose is pretty clear.
Maybe that explains also why Iran hasn't gone out and criticized it, because there will always be security competition, and even countries who see the US as a major threat, such as Iran, would still have to recognize that the declining presence of the US will have consequences. I mean, you see this around the world. If the US would pull out of East Asia, Japan might be pursuing nuclear weapons. So, China should be careful what they hope for. Same as in Europe. I mean, from Germany to Poland, they're starting to talk about their own nuclear weapons, while in France, they want to expand where their nukes are positioned. So when the US power shows to be limited or actively pulls out, something has to fill the vacuum. So if this is what fills the vacuum in West Asia, perhaps the Iranians sees this as the best of yeah of the alternatives. So that could be it. About Trump, though, his efforts to make the people forget about the war, that it's not unique to him, though. I mean, this is what we did after Afghanistan as well. It was going to be the huge embarrassment for NATO. How would we possibly overcome it? But the secret solution is always the same. Let's just stop talk about it, and then we move along. And it does work. And I got the same impression when Bessent said, Scott Bessent said, the Strait of Hormuz is not even going to be relevant anymore. I mean, this for me sounds like a guy who wants to push the Iran war out of the headlines, but that's not much of a strategy for the real world, though.
It's not any strategy at all. Of course, pipelines over the long run can relieve some of the importance of the Strait of Hormuz, but they can't replace it, and they won't. And in any event, it's no answer in the immediate circumstances, except in the context you cite, which is, it helps everybody to focus on something else and not feel quite as bad about what has been going on. If the U.S. Navy stops its blockade, the strait will be open on Iranian and Omani terms. I mean, the Iranians and Omanis have been negotiating a set of permanent arrangements for the Strait of Hormuz, which will come into effect when and if the American aggression against Iran ends. And of course, in that context, Iran is insisting that there will be no talks, no negotiation with the United States, unless and until the United States implements the actions to which it agreed in the so-called Memorandum of Understanding. Those include no verbal threats, no attacks, no oil embargo, the release of frozen assets, and the establishment of some fund to reconstruct Iran, which I don't think the Iranians expect the Americans to pay, but they certainly will look to the Gulf Arabs to finance reconstruction. So it also includes an end to the war in Lebanon. The war in Lebanon is not likely to end. We've just seen Netanyahu openly defy Donald Trump in the United States across the board. The Board of Peace proposals are unacceptable to him and to his cabinet. The end of the war in Lebanon is not in the cards. There will never be a Palestinian state, he says, and so forth and so on. And so he has thrown down the gauntlet to Donald Trump. And this, of course, raises the question of why does Donald Trump, who normally responds to challenges, not do so? And the only answer, Occam's razor, William of Occam's insight, the simplest and most obvious answer is usually the right one, is that Donald Trump is being blackmailed, both by Mossad, Netanyahu with the Epstein files probably and other material, and by his own plutocratic donor base, Jewish plutocrats who have financed his career in politics, brief as it is. So I think he can't respond. He has put himself in a position where he has no ability to advance militarily. The weaponry that he would need to do that has been so severely depleted that his own military is counseling him that any further attacks on Iran would not only not work in terms of moving Iranian positions on matters, but would also further weaken the United States' ability to respond to other contingencies. And he can't, politically, he can't retreat because he's wired himself into this, and he doesn't know how to admit defeat. When he confronts defeat, he makes up something and declares victory and denies that he was defeated. So this is very bad in terms of the prospects for the end of this period of turbulence and tension in West Asia. This is not good. Let me just talk briefly about the probable Iranian view of the tripartite entente. From their point of view, since this is a counter to the Greater Israel Project, this is very helpful. And it actually creates a sort of buffer between Iran and Israel, and it complicates Israeli strategic planning, which is why the Israelis are very unhappy about it. I don't see much unhappiness coming out of Tehran for the reasons I've just mentioned. And I think Tehran believes that if Israel remains as obnoxious as it is, there's a good chance that this tripartite entente might develop a consultative relationship of some sort with Iran. Probably not include Iran because they have an interest in countering Iranian aspirations for hegemony in the region, but not to pose an active threat to Iran, and which I think is pretty obvious. They would be passive in that context rather than active. So this is a very important development, both in terms of what it says about the erosion of the American position in West Asia generally, and what it says about the desire of the countries in the region to chart their own course. And by the way, I think this is not just limited to West Asia. If you look at East Asia, you see Japan resuming its role as a political great power, a military great power, not just an economic great power in the region. When the United States defaulted on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, Japan picked it up and created an alternative, which continues to exist and to which the Chinese are now trying to apply, probably without success given the rivalry between China and Japan. Indonesia is emerging as an independent actor. Very significantly, there is to be a modest exercise between the Indonesian and Chinese Navy off the east coast of Taiwan in the Philippine Sea. This is something that Taiwan is deeply disturbed about, but it also represents an assertion of autonomy and agency by a major country in East Asia. South Korea and North Korea are both charting independent courses. So I think, and that's true of Malaysia as well. If you look at Europe, I think the amount of hedging that is going on in anticipation of American unreliability is really very impressive. A lot of increases in defense spending, still no structure Maybe Europeans are waiting for the United States to retreat from NATO so they can take it over. But I know the Europeans don't have any strategy at all, of course, which is a sign of the age. I think by contrast, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan do have a strategy. And that is significant.